Low carb, high carb, carb cycling. Are you carb confused? What's up, everyone? Welcome back. You've likely heard 100, at least, different takes on carbohydrate. Carbs are evil. Carbs are fuel. Carbs make you sick. Carbs are the energy for our brains. So what should you be thinking? Well, my hope with this video is that I'm going to ease some of your carb concerns just a little bit. See, first I'm going to break down an approach I take with coaching. What this nutritional approach will hopefully illustrate is that there are a number of steps that are far more important to your nutrition success than how many carbs you're eating. Once we get clear on what these steps are, I promise I will offer up some answers to common questions about carbohydrates themselves. Now, periodically through today's episode, I am going to invite you inside my kitchen, and I'm going to show you how I prepare 3 different types of breakfast. I'm going to show you 3 different ways to get 70 grams of carbohydrates on your plate for 3 different meals. I'm going to control the calories, they're going to stay the same, and the protein, that's going to stay the same for all 3 meals, so that you know you're getting similar totals of nutrients, but we're just changing up what's on the plate. My hope is that by seeing a visual representation of what it looks like to get carbs on your plate, while also making sure that we check all the other important boxes that we're going to address today in this video, you can start to stress less about how you're going to tackle it yourself. Let's start off with why 70 grams of carbs. I want to help you simplify nutrition and give a few ideas of what a meal filled with higher quality foods and carbohydrates actually looks like on a plate. 70 grams might seem arbitrary, so let me put it into context for you. If you have 70 grams of carbohydrates at 3 meals a day, that lands you right around 200 grams of carbs for the entire day. That equates to 800 calories just from carbohydrates. And if you're doing a balance of all 3 macros, protein, fat, carbs, then this is going to be contributing to roughly a 2,500 calorie a day diet. You can imagine for yourself, do you need less, do you need more, and you can adjust your plates accordingly. So when do you even need to worry about counting carbs? Well, first we have to start with an important question. Which is more important, quantity or quality when it comes to food? The truth is that both matter a great deal. The debate will rage on for years to come because there's validity to both sides of the argument. Depending on how a particular coach will approach their client's nutrition, the type of client they work with, and that person's compliance, both a quantity or a quality approach can yield great success. As an example, if your goal is to lose body fat, then to achieve this, your body will need to start using its own stored body fat for energy. That only happens when there's a shortage of calories from your diet. Hence the argument that quantity is the only important factor in creating caloric deficit. But on the flip side, if you want to lose fat and maintain that caloric deficit, you are going to need to battle hunger at some point. There are going to be foods that support this better, foods that are nutrient dense, but not calorically dense, foods that fill you up, but don't pack on the calories. Those tend to come from higher quality sources. Many low quality processed foods are designed by manufacturers to be hyper palatable, meaning they're crazy delicious. And they can be hard for you to limit consumption of. And last but not least, there is the reality that our bodies interact with food very differently on a cellular level in our gut, depending on the food quality. If your gut is getting repeatedly damaged by foods that you eat, then there are going to be downstream consequences, one of which is an inability to manage your cravings and appetite very well. So the result is overconsumption due to low quality. So hopefully you can see that quantity and quality both impact the net result of how much you're going to eat and whether you're moving towards your goals. My personal experience with coaching nutrition and navigating things myself over the years has led me to a specific step-by-step checklist that has worked for me and many clients. The beauty of this checklist is that you can move through it methodically. And if you do so, you'll arrive at a recipe that helps you achieve the body that you want with an appropriate amount of difficulty relative to the goal. If you want to be shredded, then you're going to have to go and implement all the steps that I talk about and with great precision. If you simply just want to lose some weight and feel better about yourself, you may only need to follow the first 2 steps most of the time. Okay, before we dive into the checklist, we're going to break to the kitchen and go see how to prepare meal number 1 with 70 grams of carbs. Check it out. Welcome to my kitchen. I am here at my home. I'm going to show you how I can prepare 3 different meals for you that are all going to have 70 grams of carbohydrates and an emphasis on protein, 3 different styles of breakfast that you can bring right into your weekly prep. So this one is super easy, and this is basically something I had for years when I was competing in the sport of fitness, that is CrossFit, and I would have something like this most days. This is going to be an oatmeal concoction. We've got oatmeal, I'm gonna put some protein in it, we've got some milk to actually make the oats a little bit more rich, I've got some carbs that are also gonna be coming from dates, and then my protein is gonna be mainly Greek yogurt. So here's what I've got already portioned out. I've got 1 cup of milk that I am going to microwave these oats in. That's a super quick way of getting your oats cooked quickly. I'm also gonna take out the pits of these. I'm gonna throw them in the bowl while we microwave that. It's gonna make those dates nice and soft, and they're gonna mix up really delicious inside the oatmeal. I've got 1 tablespoon of almond butter. I prefer almond butter. I love the taste of peanut butter, but almond butter on a regular basis for me had always worked best. It's got a little bit of protein in it that's gonna add to the total amount of protein. And then I've got about 20 grams of protein from some grass-fed whey. And then I love Greek yogurt, whole milk Greek yogurt. That's 1 cup that I'm gonna have in addition to the oatmeal. So the carbs are coming from the dates, they're coming from the oats, and they're also coming a little bit from the milk and the dairy. And that is the first meal that's gonna get you 70 grams of carbohydrates, approximately 50 grams of protein. You can check out the macros on this meal on the screen right now. This is gonna be delicious. Let me show you how I whip it up. And just like that, we've got our protein, oatmeal, and dried fruit mixed with all of that almond butter right into this bowl with a side of Greek yogurt, and that is breakfast number 1. All right, we're back with my nutrition checklist. First step, food quality check. Are you doing the following? I'm gonna ask you to begin by eating real whole foods. You're gonna focus on eating ingredients versus packaged foods that have lists of ingredients in them. What about organic and grass-fed when it comes to quality? Well, if you can afford to buy those things, then they do pay off. I would prioritize buying the higher quality meats that you're eating because those foods that are higher up the food chain do accumulate more toxins. So once you start making high quality ingredients, the majority of what you're eating, at least 90% of your meals, and you still want to strive for something more with your nutrition, then you can move on to step 2. Step 2, dial in your food hygiene and hydration. Start chewing your food more at meals and taking your time to eat. Turn off your phone when you're eating. You got to limit distractions and only be focused on what you're doing in front of you, which is fueling your body and hopefully enjoying it with friends. And number 3, ensure that you're getting at least 50% of your body weight in pounds as fluid ounces of water every single day. See, these 3 steps are going to allow you to become much more self-aware of when you're actually hungry and when you're full. This is going to allow you to self-limit your calories much more easily and know what your body's actual needs are. So once you're doing this at least 90% of your meals and you still want to strive for something more with your nutrition, then move on to step 3. Step 3, the protein check. Are you doing the following? Do you make protein the center of every single meal? We're going to be focusing on quantity for the first time, but only with protein, because you're going to learn what an adequate and optimal amount of protein is for your body. I recommend a daily goal of 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight. Again, once you start hitting your protein goal 9 out of every 10 days, making protein the center of each meal and hitting that daily goal that you've already set out for yourself, and you still want to strive for something more with your nutrition, then you can move on to step 4. Step 4, fruits and veggie, check. Are you doing the following? Including 1 to 3 servings of fresh fruit or veggies at every meal of your day. This is not the time to stress over which is best and which has the most carbs. I just want you to find the ones that you like and put them in alongside your protein at each meal of the day. So you've got protein and you've got 1 to 3 servings of fruits and veggies and whatever else you'd like to eat. Don't stress about what else is on the plate. All right, are you now accomplishing this step 9 out of every 10 days or 9 out of every 10 meals? Are you still wanting to strive for even more with your nutrition? Okay, let's move on to step 5. But before we dive into step 5 and start looking at quantity a bit more closely, let's take a quick break, head back to the kitchen, and check out meal prep number 2 for 70 grams of carbs at breakfast. Okay, meal number 1 was very classic. Oatmeal and yogurt for breakfast, those are common breakfast foods. Here's another very common breakfast with standard foods that you might be familiar with. We're going with classic egg and cheese omelet with a side of potatoes. And for today's meal, this is what I've got. I've got some pasture-raised eggs. We're gonna do 4 eggs in an omelet. I'm also gonna put on 2 ounces of cheddar cheese. We've got a homemade salsa that I made, and I'll have a recipe coming up on that in the near future, but that is going to be inside of that omelet. I've also got a little bit of butter that I'm gonna use for frying that omelet as well. And then the potatoes, this is about 350 grams or roughly 3 small potatoes. So I'm gonna whip this together, make an omelet out of it. This is a little bit more labor intensive than the last meal, but again, we're getting 70 grams of carbohydrates, primarily from these right here, a little bit from this, and a little bit from the cheese. This is also about the same amount of protein as the oatmeal meal that you saw just a moment ago. So let's go ahead and put that together and show you how to whip up this type of breakfast, another classic standard omelet breakfast food. And that's it for the omelet, cheddar cheese, and salsa, along with these air fryer potatoes. Pretty simple to put together. The omelet, it looks kind of pretty because I took my time and I used some of the techniques that I know how to use with cooking eggs. But you know what? Your eggs don't have to look pretty to taste good. You can just scramble them up. If you like hard-boiled eggs, that's fine too. This is a nice presentation of this. Those potatoes were super simple. I threw them in the air fryer for about 20 minutes on 400, and I didn't really even need to touch them. And now they're crunchy, browned, and delicious. So if you're looking for a way to get in some carbohydrates from potatoes because that's what you like, this is a great way to do it. Pretty simple. That's the only real form of carbohydrates that we're getting. And then for your protein, eggs and cheddar cheese with a little bit of salsa for some flavor and some Himalayan pink sea salt. That's how we wrap up meal number 2. All right, step 5. We're tracking your calories now to get a ballpark of your daily intake. You're gonna start tracking everything that you eat and drink for a minimum of 7 days. You're going to raise your awareness with how many calories you're eating and grams of macronutrients by completing this very important quantity step. The only numbers you really need to focus on at this stage are still the grams of daily protein that you're eating and the servings of fruits and veggies at each meal. The purpose of this step is truly to just see how many calories and roughly how many macros am I eating when I eat protein and veggies at every meal, plus whatever else that appeals to me. If you completed this step for at least 7 days, consider going on to 4 weeks or 30 days. Now, if you've done that and you still want to strive for something more with your nutrition, it's time to move on to step 6. Step 6, use the functional bodybuilding macro calculator, which is linked in the description below, to determine roughly what your daily caloric needs are in order to hit the goal that you specify in the calculator. You'll calculate the macros with moderate carbohydrates just to get started. Once you have your numbers from our calculator, you're going to continue to track everything that you eat and drink, but now you're actually going to aim to hit your new numbers precisely every single day. That might mean decreasing your calories or increasing your calories and slightly adjusting how many carbs and how much fat that you're having. Be sure that you don't sacrifice any of the earlier steps that I've mentioned. If you stop drinking enough water, if you stop sitting down to chew your food, then you have skipped important steps and it's time to go back up the ladder to the earlier stages. All right, did you complete this for 14 days? Do you still want to strive for something more with your nutrition? Are you looking to change your body and your performance even further? If so, then now's the time to move on to step 7. Step 7. Finally, we are arriving at a step where you can start to tweak your carbs and other macros. This is where you're going to use the FBB macro calculator, remember, linked in the description below, to adjust your goal, maybe your protein amount, and the level of carbohydrates that you want to take in. If you have gone through step 6 above, and you're now here at step 7, then guess what? You're in the top 1% of all dieters out there in the world, and you are now in refinement mode. You're kicking ass. You can experiment all you want at this point. You can use intuition based on what has felt good up until this point to adjust those numbers. Or if you want to explore something that you read about like low carb diets or high carb diets or carb cycling, we have features inside the calculator that allow you to pick a new set of numbers that you can follow. Just a quick note, as you manipulate your carbs up and down, you are going to simultaneously and inversely be manipulating your fat intake. What this means is that by going low carb with the same calories, you're going to be increasing your fat by default. Conversely, if you raise your carbs up, then you're going to have to reduce your fat accordingly to maintain that caloric balance. Before we wrap up this video with some common questions and answers about the purpose and function of carbohydrates in the diet, let's head back to the kitchen for the third and final meal prep example. Here's breakfast number 3. All right, I'm coming back with number 3, breakfast option number 3. Now, the first 2 meals were very traditional breakfast foods, at least American breakfast foods. We had oatmeal with some yogurt, we had an omelet with some potatoes, and now I'm going to show you something that I have been consuming a lot more of lately. This is an animal-based breakfast. It's based in fruit, honey, and meat. I've got some cooking fat here. I'll explain what that is in a minute. The first meal I showed you was a vegetarian option. Didn't have any animal products in it other than dairy. The second option was, again, that classic eggs and potatoes for breakfast. This might be food that most people don't look at as typical traditional breakfast foods. I'm gonna have a burger patty made out of wild boar. I'm gonna use beef tallow. This is a cooking oil that is extremely great for cooking. It's got good flavor, it's heat stable, and it has some good fatty acids in it and a lot of fat soluble micronutrients. This is honey. Honey is a great source of carbohydrates, and since we're trying to build a meal that's got 70 grams of carbs within it, honey's gonna work well as some fresh fruit. I've got a banana, a medium-sized banana, and this is 200 grams, just over a cup of blueberries. So I'm gonna whip this up. This is the only thing that needs preparation, so I'm gonna cook this off, and then the rest of this honey I would just eat raw, or I would pour it over my banana, and then this is gonna be my cooking fat, which is gonna be what I put this wild boar burger patty in this pan. So let me get to cooking that right now. That's all it takes. Take that meat, grill it up in a pan, use a little bit of that cooking oil, that fat, that beef tallow to baste it as you're cooking it. If you'd like, that's a nice technique to add some more flavor, but all I put on that was salt. So now I've got my protein, I've got my carbs, and That is essentially the entire meal. This is probably the easiest meal prep of all three because it didn't really require much except for cooking off a little bit of meat, which you can do ahead of time. You can have those in your fridge so that this type of meal is extremely quick. If we look at all three meals that I made oatmeal with protein. It had 70 grams of carbs. I made an omelet with potatoes. It had 70 grams of carbs. This meal, also 70 grams of carbs if I eat these 2 pieces of fruit and that tablespoon of honey. It's really not about what you eat when it comes to quantity. You can always construct a meal with exactly the macros that you want. When it comes to quality of food, the type of foods that you choose, which one of these feels best for you, makes you ready to tackle your day, makes your digestion feel good, these are the things that I want you to be focused on. I have been consuming this type of meal a lot. I will eat the eggs, the omelet with the potatoes. That's happening for me frequently. I'm having Greek yogurt in the morning, but I've tended to stay away from oats just because it doesn't feel best for me. But if you love it and it feels great for you, then here are 3 ways that you can grab 70 grams of carbohydrates and a healthy dose of protein every single morning. All right, back to the Q&A. Do you need carbs for endurance? We are totally capable of fueling with fat for endurance events. In fact, if you're doing long aerobic and endurance events at lower intensity, becoming fat adapted as a fuel source may even have some benefits. Now, I'm sure you've heard that carbs are important for endurance, and historically, many endurance athletes that perform at the world's highest level have fueled with carbs. Take the Tour de France riders as an example. They have been known to drink things like Coca-Cola mid-ride just so that they can get sugars into their system to help their performance. How you personally choose to adapt to fueling, training, and dieting, and the intensity of your endurance sport that you're playing are going to impact whether carbs need to be present or not in your diet for endurance. Do you need carbs for intensity training? Well, as I alluded to before, higher intensity bouts in sport and in training generally fall under the category of training that requires glycolysis for energy production. That's when we're using sugar as a fuel source or glucose as a fuel source for energy production. Now, our bodies can create this on our own. However, a diet that consists of slightly higher carbs can make it extremely helpful for fueling and recovery from this type of training. So if you're doing high intensity training in the gym, carbohydrates could absolutely play a role in recovery as well as fueling for that training. Do you need carbohydrates to build muscle? Well, the first ingredient to this recipe is you need a sufficient training stimulus. The second ingredient to building muscle is that you need, in most cases, to be in a calorie surplus, meaning you have more energy coming in than what you're putting out in the gym and throughout your day. And finally, the last part of this recipe is we need adequate protein intake. That's it. Training stimulus, caloric surplus, protein intake. So then the question becomes, how does carbohydrate help you hitting all 3 of these categories? Do the carbohydrates make it easier for you to train harder and get the training stimulus? Do the carbs allow you to get more into a caloric surplus? And can you continue to get enough protein on a really high carb diet? Anecdotally, a lot of people will say that they train harder with carbs in their diet, that they can consume more energy when they add in carbohydrates, meaning they can stay in a caloric surplus easier. So with those 2 things in mind, it may be very beneficial for you to add carbohydrates into a muscle building program nutritionally and training wise that you're following. It isn't necessary, and you can still get an adequate training stimulus, protein, and caloric surplus even on a moderate to low carb diet. Look, I have followed high carb diets and kept a lean muscular physique. I have followed low carb diets and kept a lean muscular physique. It doesn't really make the big difference. At the end of the day, you have to look at what is your goal. Ultimately, I don't think it really makes a difference whether you go one way or the other. Dialing in carbohydrates and experimenting with the ratios of carbs and fats should only happen after you've addressed the other priority items that I covered today, like protein, hydration, food quality, and eating routines. If you do want to go further, keep in mind that there is no one perfect prescription for the amount of carbs and fats that are right for you. It will likely be a combination of what supports your individual goals as well as what feels good in your body. So stay open-minded to experimentation and tracking your results over periods of several weeks and months. Adjust as needed until you find the perfect balance for you. And always keep your goal in mind. If you want to perform, then always judge what level of carbs supports that best for you. If you want to be shredded or lean out, then look at what level of carbs support that best for you. The answer might be different depending on the goal. Now, I've referenced it several times in this video, but just as a reminder, be sure to head down to the description and click the link to the FBB free macro calculator. You're going to get immediate results right on the screen, and then you can do it as many times as you want, and each time we'll email you your results with bonus free training and nutrition ebooks from FBB. As always, thank you for your time and attention. I know this was a longer video. I hope it was valuable to you, and I will see you next time.